And there are some things that we take for granted today that the Constitution does not allow. Um, the Constitution specifically says that there shall not be a standing army. But today, we take it for granted that the U.S. has an army. That's just how it is. The Constitution does allow for a Navy. So your Navy and your Marines would fall under that. And they didn't allow for an Air Force because I'm sure nobody even really imagined that flying could really be a feasible thing back in those days. So there have been some adjustments to technology that have taken place, but the Constitution was not adjusted to match. So there's a lot of how we interpret things right now that just aren't correct with how it was written. If you want some interesting reading, there were 8 states that had constitutions at the time the federal Constitution was written. They're very enlightening as to some of their ideas. The Pennsylvania's Constitution allowed for what was called a Privy Council, and what they did was they would meet to decide if the laws that were created matched the Constitution. The power was not given to the judiciary branch. It was given to the Privy Council to decide. And what this did was it protected the legislature from being usurped by the judicial branch. So everybody was kept in their places throughout all the things that would occur. But what this did also is allowed the Privy Council to decide separate from the majority rule whether or not they thought this was a good idea. So laws were decided by the people, but also by the separate council to make sure that nobody's rights were being trampled on just because they were in the minority. Lawmaking in Pennsylvania in 1777 consisted of the legislature would propose a bill. It would have to be read so many times in legislature. It would have to be posted so that all Pennsylvanians could read it for a period of so many months. And then the next group of legislatures that would meet got to vote on it. They were annually selected for legislature. So if you didn't like the way your representative wanted to vote, you voted them out and voted the next person in so that they would vote the way you wanted on every single bill. So here we see a very strong check of the people. There weren't laws going around being made behind closed doors. There wasn't any laws that were being shoved down our throats. It was in check the entire way. And I think it would be a good idea for a lot of Americans to go back and read some of these original constitutions to get a better idea of what the Constitution represented. Pennsylvania's Constitution was one of the ones that the U.S. Constitution was followed after when it was written. That one and the Virginia one were the strongest constitutions mimicked. Another issue that Pennsylvania specifically dealt with was having guns to protect yourself. The U.S. Constitution talks about being allowed to have a gun, but it doesn't talk in specifics, and often it's been said that the idea was to defend the country, you had to have a gun, whereas the Pennsylvania's Constitution of 1776 specifically states that it's in defense of country, but also in defense of your house and your person. So there are some specifics in the state constitutions that the U.S. Constitution was modeled after that are very enlightening. And I think there's a lot of things that are going on in the country today that are against the Constitution, and they are the things that have been destroying this country. And one more real quick before we wrap this up. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to print money. But today we have a private organization printing the money and Congress borrowing from them. So rather than Congress having the money printed by themselves, they are now increasing our debt and borrowing this printed money. So there's some very serious problems attached to ignoring the Constitution. And I think it'd be very important for everybody to take a little bit of time and look into the Constitution and understand what things are being taken for granted or ignored completely, or blatantly doing the opposite of what the Constitution tells us to do. And I think that's a good basis for understanding the problems this country is facing.